Greetings and salutations. Today we are beginning a multi-part series on the lore of Luclin. There's much to go over with Luclin, so we are breaking it up into a multiple-part series. In today's video, we are going to go over the extensive history of Luclin. Sit back and enjoy. Luclin is a realm of exiles. From the loyalist refugees of the Combine Empire and their pursuers, the Inquisitors, to the evil Shissar and the luckless Karens known as the Vah Shir. All of the major races that inhabit the Lost Moon of Luclin were cast out or voluntarily fled Norath. They found a world that was a strange wonderland, one side sunk in eternal shadow, the other in constant sunlight. Beneath the surface of the world were vast caverns where strange plants and bizarre creatures throve. The surface of Luclin was a place of mountains, deserts, oceans, and plains. Over the generations, these exiles, and those born of them, came to think of Luclin as home, and when adventurers from the kingdoms of Norath once more began to arrive, the established peoples of Luclin were well removed from the races that had given them birth. The Goddess Luclin. Luclin gets its name from the creator, the goddess of the shadows. For untold ages, Luclin dwelt in the darkness of Norath, watching as the other gods fought and squabbled over the land and its inhabitants. At last, she could stand no more, and left the world altogether, moving to the world's ringed moon. From the security of Luclin's dark side, the goddess allowed Vishan's seeds of life to germinate, and then nurtured the creatures that crept forth. All the while, Luclin watched over Norath as the gods continued to squabble. As they descended into open warfare, Luclin yet lurked in shadow. She remained neutral in the great conflict between Tunair and Inaruk, bewildered by their foolishness. The creatures that grew from the seeds of Vishan spread across the once lifeless moon. Luclin herself created other life forms as well, the first and most powerful being the Akheva, those immortal four-armed creatures who even today remain her most loyal subjects. Elsewhere, other species grew and thrived. The insectoid Shiknar built their hive complexes. Galorians carved out tribal territories in the moon's rugged wilderness lands, and the Tegi spread across the entire orb, dividing themselves into numerous independent tribes. Beneath the surface, great burrower beasts carved labyrinthine tunnels among which fungal fiends and tentacle thought horrors thrived. Though it seemed a bleak and distant world to those who watched it from Norath, Luclin was a place of life and vitality. And then, after countless years of isolation, Luclin was once again visited by outsiders. The Shissar. The rise of the Shissar snake people on Norath did not escape the observant goddess's notice. As their empire grew more powerful, the Shissar became increasingly arrogant, eventually convinced that their power rivaled that of the gods themselves. At last, the gods punished the Shissar for their hubris, sending a deadly green mist that caused the snake folk to sicken and die. The Shissar faced destruction, but a handful of survivors found a way to escape from Norath, fleeing to Luclin's moon. Their empire had been destroyed, and the few snake people who remained were a fearful, superstitious, and paranoid lot. Luclin thought long about their fate, but at length she did allow them to stay in the region known as the Grey. Back on Norath, most believed the Shissar were gone forever, driven to extinction by the vengeance of the gods. The Ixar, who had been enslaved by the wicked snake people, rejoiced, and soon became one of the foremost races of Norath. Memory of the Shissar faded until they became little more than creatures of myth, no one knew that the Shissar still lurked in their refuge on the moon of Luclin, still served by the descendants of their Ixar slaves. The surviving Shissars began construction of a new temple and covered the vicinity of their new home with a vast dome of magical force, drawing all air from the region save immediately around the temple itself, so that the green mist would have no means of reaching them. Now safe, the Shissar began to settle into their new home, but all was not well for the snake folk, for the wizard Vizdra began plotting to seize power. The writings of the renowned Shissar wizard Tishanel speak of the snake folk's curse and their flight to the moon, and his writings are as follows. Almost all are dead. Why have the gods cursed us so? We dared to reach them, we dared to become as them, and they found fault with this. Our crime was arrogance, some say. Is the desire for greatness arrogance? Is ambition a sin? In the eyes of the gods, apparently it is. The green mist has taken most of the Emperor's court. Only a few, including Emperor Shaza, his loyal counselor, the great Vizdra, myself, and a few retainers survive. I have managed to hide the royal heir in my wing of the palace. Isolated from the rest, we have a chance of surviving. I must find the cure for the green mist sickness, or our whole civilization is lost. I, first wizard of the Emperor's court, am the only one left alive who can find the answer. I have found something. I know not if it will work, but it is our only chance. I pray to whatever deity is still listening that it may stave off the dreadful plague. How the gods torment us. Is our suffering simply an amusement? My spell was partially successful, and we are now safe from the plague, but not as I have imagined. Somehow my spell transported us to a new world, which we have since discovered is the moon of Luclin. It is a harsh and unforgiving realm, but at least for the moment, we are safe. We have set slaves to building temporary dwellings for us, and we are making plans for a temple. The green mist may return, even here, so I am drawing up plans to transform this entire region to protect us from harm. I worry about Vizdra. He does not seem happy with Emperor Shraza's rule. I fear he will rebel, and I cannot allow. The Emperor's bloodline has remained unbroken since the dawn of history, and it must not end now. My agents tell me that Vizdra is dwelling into forbidden subjects, possibly black magic and necromancy. Action must be taken, for we cannot allow him to bring destruction upon us all, not when we are so close to destruction already. Work continues on the great temple. Our people still fear the gods' vengeance, and the Emperor seems worst of all. He has decreed that my barrier must keep out the very air itself. I am now researching a way to fulfill the Emperor's command. Hopefully this solution will ease some of the fear of my people. My work is completed. The temple is finished, and the great spell appears to have sealed us into the airless void where the green mist cannot come. At last we can rest in the safety from vengeance of the gods, and from the green death that ravaged our people. All the same, some things are lost forever. I mourn the loss of the great empire. We are a race of refugees now, cowering in our temple, afraid of everything and everyone. Our food is plain, our lives simple, and our young people grow harsh and wild as this lost moon. I lament the lost empire, but I shall do what I can to ensure our race's survival. A new race of beings has appeared, tunneling in the caverns beneath our temple. We have captured one of them for study. They seem to use some power of their minds for battle, but we are largely unharmed by such primitive tactics. We have determined that the rulers of this race want to study us and learn our weaknesses. The Emperor is not at all concerned, and in truth, neither am I, for we are sure to prevail if they choose to attack. Vizdra has turned against us, and now threatens us all with his madness and treachery. There is only one way to contain him, for I fear even in death he will become uncontrollable. I have devised a spell that will, I fear, require the power of my own life force to entrap Vizdra. I pray to the nameless deities, even to those who cursed us, that this will save my emperor and my people. My life ends, But in dying, I leave my legacy to those who come after. Long live the Empire, and long live our mighty people. Tescharnel did indeed sacrifice himself to trap Vysdra, but even today, the Shissar continue to fear him and his minions. Meanwhile, the mysterious new race that plagued the snake folk proved to be humanoid monsters known as thought horrors. Children of Luclin herself, the horrors dwelled in the lightless abyss known as the Deep, and eventually made their way into the halls of Shazra Temple. Fearful of the Shissar's power, these creatures represented the intrusion of the snake people, and soon after Tescharnel's sacrifice, began to move against the Shissar in large numbers. Little is known of the conflict between the thought horrors and the snake people, but it is a contest apparently still going on in the tunnels beneath the Grey and in the adjacent caverns of the Deep. At first, the thought horrors, mentally enslaved creatures, assaulted the temple. The height of the assault came when a horde of burrowing worms emerged into the mines near the lower levels, accompanied by an army of murderous thought horrors. The Shissar and their slaves met the enemy in the narrow tunnels and pushed them back, though the cost was great. As a result, and given the ever-present threat of the Green Mist, the Shissar have been cautious about venturing beyond their airless homeland, but the war with the thought horrors has convinced Emperor Shrazra that they cannot remain isolated forever. An especially cruel and power-hungry race, the Shissar have begun once more to contemplate founding a new empire in which they can make rule unchallenged. Perhaps the human and Karens will make worthy slaves to help build this great new empire. But so far, the Shissar have contented themselves to planning and dreaming of a return to greatness. The opening of the gates of subsequent arrival of adventurers from Norath has made the Shissar's position even more precarious, for now they fear that they may once more come to the gods' notice, and that divine vengeance may be redoubled upon them. The coming of the Combine. The lost Combine Empire, first and greatest human nation, survives on the moon of Luclin, though it is a mere shadow of its ancient self. Luclin herself prevented the Empire's return and drove the geomancer Grieg to madness. The conflict between the Combine loyalists and their Inquisitor foes amuses the Maiden of Shadows, and she is reluctant to allow either faction to leave lest they rob her of her entertainment. Combine historian Aliane Rainmist, an elven druid of Tunair, tells the tragic tale of the Combine's collapse and its survivors' flight to Luclin, and his tale goes like this. I speak now of the Combine Empire, the greatest commonwealth ever to exist on Norath. It is said by some uninformed historians that the Empire was ruled by humans, being the first great human state. Yet these historians do not know the truth. In our prime, we, as those folk who comprised the Empire, ruled almost all of Norath, and under our rule, we of the premier races lived in harmony and peace, in an enlightened alliance not only of humans, but of elves, Northmen, dwarves, halflings, and gnomes. The great bard Saf Kata was our benevolent and wise leader. His policy was to judge every being on his or her actions, and to allow each being to prove itself. Birth, wealth, prowess, and influence were not used to determine an individual's status. No citizen of the Empire had greater privilege than another. None were above the law, and none outside it. Guided by Kata's enlightened wisdom, we prospered and grew together in peace and love. In the end, though, it was Kata's very kindness that sealed his and our doom. For though he had conquered the injustices of office, he could not conquer the envy and evil that dwelled in the heart of many of his subjects. Kata's greatest general was a man called Saru. This Grand Duke had won many battles on behalf of his lord, bringing strength and security to our empire. Handsome, intelligent, and charming, Saru rose through the ranks of the imperial army and soon became Emperor Kata's most trusted minister. Many distrusted him, however, for they knew that Saru concealed a heart consumed with ambition and greed. Emperor Kata would hear none of this, however. wise though he was, and chose to see only the best of his friend, willfully blind to Saru's cruelty and thirst for power. Assured by the Emperor's trust and secure in his position, Saru began to plan his great betrayal. Saru's motives for betrayal are not certain. Most believe that he was simply black-hearted and evil, envious of the love and respect paid to Saf Kata by his people. Some try to justify his actions as having been motivated by Kata's plans to incorporate the ogres of Ogok and the trolls of Inithul into the Combine Empire. Regardless of his reasons, Saru brought about the end of the Empire and extinguished all hope on Norath. The end occurred at a great state banquet where the representative of many other races and nations attended. Saru's assassin was there as well, unknown to our Emperor. When Kata shook the hand of a seeming well-wisher, he did not know that the stranger's glove had been coated with a terrible poison. Within a few minutes, the Emperor lay dying, and the Combine Emperor was dying with him, for Saru and his minions had begun their great rebellion. But the Emperor did not perish. His loyal druids wove protective spells, holding him in stasis, and the elves took his inert body to their forests where they could conceal and protect it. Kata's chief advisor, his wife, the bard Lacia, called a council for those of us still loyal to her and her husband's cause. The Empire was naught but a corpse. Mere days after Kata's fall, it was irreparably sundered. In our great council, we hit upon a desperate plan. As Lacia contemplated our future, she gazed upon and saw the moon of Luclin. She decreed that this would be our refuge, from which we would recreate Kata's vision of peace and security, and hopefully one day return to reclaim our empire. Months passed, and thousands of loyalists gathered around the greatest wizard spire on Velius. Elsewhere, the empire writhed in its death throes as many of its subjects declared independence and moved to plunder its riches. The armies of Saru and his so-called Inquisitors sought out the remaining loyalists, but through acts of heroism and self-sacrifice. Saru was held at bay. At last, Luclin was at its closest approach to Norath. The man chosen to perform the ritual was Grieg, a powerful geomancer and a master of teleportation magics. Aided by others among the greatest spellcasters of the Loyalists, he performed the ritual, and as one, we were carried in our thousands through space to Luclin. When we arrived on Luclin, though, we discovered that Grieg had miscalculated. Instead of transporting us to the surface of the moon, his spell had placed us in the caverns below it. A strange black orb, which we called the Nexus, had apparently drawn us there, to the center of the vast cave complex. Fear assailed us. Were we trapped? Would we starve to death without ever seeing open sky again? Many of us vented our rage at Grieg, but after several months, we were able to find safe routes to the surface. By this time, some of our people had grown accustomed to the caves and wished to stay there. Their devotion to the Empire was never great to begin with, and I suspect that many of them had joined us simply to escape the scourge of the Inquisitors. The majority of our people ventured into the eternal twilight above, where we built our new city, Kata Castlum. Our ruler remained with us, still maintained in a magical slumber, though one day we hoped to reawaken him. Grieg the Geomancer stayed behind in the new community of Shadowhaven. By this time, we had grown weary of him in any event, for his loyalty had become suspect, and most of us believed that he had joined with us simply as a way of gaining greater wealth and power. His miscalculations had almost been the end of us, and we were happy to see him gone. For a time, Grieg remained in Shadowhaven, aiding the others in his construction of the new settlement. Unfortunately, he continued in his old ways, and his spells often did more harm than good. He continued to seek greedily for knowledge, driven by his own lust for power, and caring little for the safety of those around him. After an especially disastrous incident in which several caves collapsed, killing dozens, the trade families that ruled Shadowhaven demanded that he leave. Grieg found no refuge with us, for we knew his nature, and that he cared nothing for the lost glory of the Empire. Besides, We had learned that, as a result of another error in his calculations, we were trapped on Luclin for the foreseeable future. The moon would not approach Norath again for millennia. While we built Catacassalum, expanded our defenses, and learned of the new dangerous home, and while the Shadowhaven folk recovered from the damage he had done, Grieg wandered Luclin, at last arriving on the light side of the moon, where he raised up a new citadel south of Dawnshroud Peaks. Here in the fortress he called Grieg's End, he settled down to learn more of geomancy and to seek solace from the lunar refuge that had become our prison. Grieg's quest ended in despair, for Luclin the goddess who ruled the moon drove him mad for his presumption. Today's Grieg's End is a foul and cursed place, haunted by strange, ghostly creatures and plagued by spells spawned by Grieg's madness. It is said that those who venture there are transformed into strange shapes and appear different to all who observe them. It is also said that Grieg himself still lingers on as a tormented spirit, ever seeking knowledge that he can never attain. But Grieg's fate was not relevant to us, not then, for we learned all too soon that our enemies had followed us. Saru's bid to take over our realm had failed. Instead of controlling the Empire, he merely destroyed it, and now Norath was in turmoil of chaos and death. Yet even in defeat, Saru burned for vengeance when he learned that we had escaped. Surely he did not know Kata still lived, else his anger might have been even greater. Upon learning how we fled Norath, Saru set his pet wizard to duplicating our feat, and after some time and great effort, they cast a similar spell, one that transported Saru and a good number of his Inquisitors to Shadowhaven. Saru and his followers arrived at the Nexus, but were shocked to see the fortifications and armed forces that Shadowhaven raised against them. After long negotiations, the Shadowhaven folk allowed the Inquisitor to depart through many of Saru's people, though many of Saru's people also remained behind to aid in researching the Nexus, determined to find a way to escape from Luclin's pull. As time passed, the Inquisitors who stayed behind ended up mingling with the folk of Shadowhaven, while the others journeyed to the daylight zone of Luclin, where they constructed their own citadel, the city of Sanctus Saru. Their magic sustained the wizard Lord Inquisitor Saru even still, and he lives in perpetuity, spurred on by his desire to crush the last remnants of the old empire. Thus we remain in a constant stalemate with the Inquisitor, but I fear that this will not last forever. Our spies report that Saru trains his Inquisitors to march on Catacassalum, and that he seeks alliance with the dark powers of Luclin. The people of Sanctus Saru are harsh and evil, holding gladiatorial games for entertainment and reveling in death and slaughter. Yet we are prepared to defend ourselves and preserve our way of life for as long as we are stranded on the moon of Luclin. The Inquisitors were not the only enemy faced by the beleaguered Loyalists. Enemies assailed the followers of Saf Kata both from within and from without. The city's most persistent foes were undead creatures known as vampires. The first vampires encountered by the Loyalists were clad in the garb of Shadowhaven merchants, apparently infected and transformed into undead by other vampires. Soon the Loyalists discovered that the Tenebrous Mountains were infested with the creatures, an alliance of vampires known as the Coterie of Eternal Night. The struggle between the two factions began immediately and continues to this day. Though they did not attack in great numbers, a handful of vampires once entered the city through subterranean passages or perhaps under the cover of invisibility, infecting innocent citizens and recruiting them as murderous minions. Today, some areas of Catacassalum are especially perilous, for the lack of sunlight allows these horrific creatures to move and act with virtual impunity. Within Catacassalum's own walls, threats to the security of refugees continue to fester. Some chafe at the rule of the Councilman Universis, the council that leads the city in Safkata's stead, and call for change. Others see dark conspiracies in the city's many shadows. Some have even gone as far to claim that Safkata himself has returned as an undead creature transformed by the vampires, and now ruling the city as an immortal monster. The emergence of such factions and the continued predations of the vampires amount to unsettling evidence that the Loyalist society is beginning to falter. As their foes grow bolder and their own people nurse more and more substantial doubts, the future seems less and less certain. The recent arrival of outsiders, adventurers, and explorers from Norath has fired the Loyalists with new hope, however. With the gates to their homeland once more open, some have begun to openly speak of a return, a reconquista, in which the Combine Empire takes back its own lands and returns them to enlightened rule. Many Loyalists are more pragmatic, however, soberly pointing out the Combine's halcyon days are gone forever. They are Luclinites now, these individuals say, and though the new travel routes have improved life for those on both sides of the gates, it is best that they remain on this strange world that has become their home. The Inquisitors. The Loyalists' oldest foes, Saru's Inquisitors, are the last remnants of the rebels who once tried to conquer the Empire, but who instead destroyed it. Saru, the traitor who tried to murder his lord and thus brought about the Combine's utter collapse, still lives in the depths of his keep, the Arx Saru within the city of Sanctus Saru, from which he rules with an iron hand. Blind to the terrible tragedy he has caused, Saru became obsessed with pursuing and finally defeating the Loyalists. When they escaped to Luclin's moon, the warlord's anger was terrible. It is said that in his initial rage, he killed at least 4 slaves and injured countless others, at a time when he should have been consolidating his gains and establishing his control over the Combine Empire. Saru instead bade his followers find out how Kata and his people escaped. As subject peoples rose up and plundered the far corners of the fallen empire, Saru obsessively pursued his research until at last he discovered what had happened. As quickly as possible, Saru gathered up his armies, and his wizards cast their own version of Greek's transportation spell as the world fell into blood and chaos behind him. Saru led his people in pursuit of his hated enemies. After negotiations with the wary shadow folk, the Inquisitors were at last allowed to venture to the surface. There they discovered that Kata's loyalists had fled into the Tenebrous Mountains and were engaged in building a great citadel. Weary, out of supplies, and their own horror trapped on Luclin, Saru and his army reluctantly realized that they could not defeat Kata. Not yet, anyways. Immediately, the Inquisitors began construction of their own great city, which their leader arrogantly named Sanctus Saru. A model of geometric precision and flawless architecture, the city reflected its master's cunning, mathematically precise mind. Stone was brought from the neighboring Dawnshroud peaks, despite skirmishes with hostile Galorian tribes and predatory rockhoppers. Food was harvested from the caverns below, and soon the Inquisitors learned how to cultivate mushrooms and other indigenous fungi. Farms in Dawnshroud Peak also produced food for the city. The Inquisitors' influence spread into neighboring wilderness, soon renamed Maris Saru. This blasted wasteland became a place of exile for those who had failed to serve the Inquisitors, but who were not deemed worthy of execution. These pitiful creatures, eventually known as Reclusos, reformed a rough and violent culture in Maris Saru, where they dwell to this day, fighting with the hardy creatures who share the wasteland with them, attacking outsiders or stealing what they can to survive. The Inquisitors are strong. In their own region, they are virtually unchallenged, but their strength also lies in isolation, for their hated foes, the Loyalists, are on the other side of the moon, across a distance that not even Saru's fearsome power can easily cause his people to bridge. Shadowhaven. In between the two major human cities of Luclin lies the hidden complex called Shadowhaven. Extending far beneath the moon's rocky surface, this place is populated by the descendants of those loyalists who stayed behind when the rest went on to found Catacassalum. As well, it is home to those Inquisitors who wish to research the secrets of the Nexus, the mysterious black orb that appeared to have drawn the humans to its location on the moon. The days after Exodus from Norath were harsh for the people of Shadowhaven. Starting from the natural caverns beneath the moon, they began to expand outward, hollowing out new corridors and chambers. Initially, they were aided by the geomancer Grieg, who had chosen to stay in Shadowhaven rather than live with the derision of loyalists, who blamed his faulty calculations for their apparent entombment in the caverns. After several disastrous mistakes by the wizard, however, the trade families, those wealthy merchants who had become Haven's rulers, ordered him to leave. The people carried on their excavations, and perhaps not surprisingly, fatalities and accidents indeed decreased substantially after the geomancer's departure. The Haveners eventually expanded into the neighboring Paladal Caverns complex, discovering the great groves of edible fungi there, as well as the dangerous creatures that dwelt therein. Harvesting foodstuffs was made hazardous by hostile Tegi, predatory fungal fiends, and the recondite bandits, dissatisfied Haveners who sought to carve out their own society free of the trade family's oppressive regime. Shadowhaven forces also ventured into the Fungus Grove, which they encountered the Shiknar, insect creatures, and the Grove's own band of renegades, outcasts from the Sun's revenant people who called themselves Shadel Bandits. Despite these challenges, routes to both the Fungal Grove and the Paladal Caverns had to remain open, for the food obtained in these places keep Shadowhaven alive. A neutral state comfortably nestled between the Inquisitors and the Loyalists, Shadowhaven welcomed and traded freely with both sides, and with anyone else who wished to approach them. In some ways, Shadowhaven reflected many values of the old Combine Empire, allowing anyone to live and trade freely within its boundaries, regardless of race, religion, or outlook, as long as they obeyed the city's laws. Under the rule of houses Fordell, Midst, Nodadal, and Earthcrafter, those referred to collectively as the trade families, the city became a center for trade and diplomacy. After a time the city prospered, troubled only by occasional incursions of hostile Shiknar or fungus fiends from outlying caverns. Research into the Nexus and its mysterious magical qualities continued. In time, the Inquisitors who stayed behind joined the Shadowhaven Society, forsaking Saru's rigid, joyless rule. For their part, the Inquisitors chose not to make an issue of the researchers' actions, for Shadowhaven was becoming vital to Sanctus Saru's economy, and not even Saru wished to antagonize the powerful trade families. The Nexus itself proved difficult to research. The Nexus's emanations could be qualified or quantified, and were clearly powerful, but the Black Orb itself proved impervious to any such examination. It had helped to transport both the Loyalists and the Inquisitors to the moon, but now stubbornly refused to yield up secrets, or to the researchers' even greater consternation, to be reactivated to allow any further transportation either to or from Norath. Some researchers speculate that the Nexus's inactivity was due to the moon's location relative to Norath, and that once the distance between the two worlds decreased again, free transit would once more become possible. Others postulated that the original exodus was possibly only because the sheer amount of raw magical energy needed to travel to the moon, and that such magical power, for some unknown reason, could no longer be summoned on Luclin. Still others claimed that Luclin herself had closed the gate, preventing more interlopers from entering her homeworld. In the end, the answer appeared to be a combination of all three theories. The moon was still far from Norath when the celebrated Al-Kabor made the momentous discovery that led to reopening the lunar gates. But the wizard and his assistants were able to summon up considerable magical energy utilizing the power of the ancient wizard spires. The combination of forces created a situation that had not existed for ages, the opening of free transport between Norath and the moon of Luclin. The first arrival of outsiders came unexpectedly when Al-Kabor and his fellow wizards emerged from the Nexus and entered the bizarre region of Shadowhaven. Their arrival caused a sensation, and within hours, the entire community was abuzz with the news. The way Norath was opened once more, and a flood of adventurers, travelers, and explorers was certain to come. And come it did, much to the delight of the trade families. Vital to human society on Luclin, Shadowhaven now became a critical crossroads between the two worlds. Platinum, gold, and silver flowed freely as visitors of a dozen races came and went with relative freedom. Happily, the trade families watched their riches accumulate, and the cunning people of Shadowhaven happily offered to trade even more openly with the newcomers. This is how Shadowhaven remains today, as travel to and from Luclin becomes more and more frequent. No one knows how long this situation will last, and those researchers who still probe the secrets of the Nexus cannot guarantee that the gates will not close as unexpectedly as they were opened. For the time being, however, Shadowhaven is content to be a critical waypoint on the road to adventure on Luclin. The Vah Shir. The Vah Shir are an offshoot of the Karen race that originated on the Nerathian continent of Otis. Legend holds that the Karens were once bitterly divided and in the throe of a bloody civil war when a great leader, Kezhin Kareth, emerged to unite the tribes into a single nation. A golden age followed, during which the Karens became the dominant species of Otis. Kezhin proved a wise and resourceful ruler, drawing his elite nobles from among the Karen clans. From Clan Shir came nobles, generals, and warriors. From Kezhik came shamans and counselors. From the clan of Shahar, Kezhin drew his hunters and farmers, and from Clan Kanari, he selected his civil servants and bureaucrats. The so-called Kamayat Kareth grew in strength and influence. The coming of the Erudites proved catastrophic for the Karens. Even though relations between the two races were good, when a small number of Erudites first took up the practice of necromancy, however, the Karens began to fall ill, and soon plague raged through their cities and villages. Convinced that the heretic Erudites and their dark magic were responsible, Kezhin himself went to treat with their leaders, but even he returned weak and sickly. He died soon thereafter, and his son Vah took the throne. Vah gathered his elite forces into the Shir city of Sharval, intending to join the Erudites in their war against the heretics. Before he could act, however, a great battle broke out between the heretics and the Erudites, resulting in a huge piece of Norath being flung into space, and among them, the city of Sharval. The rogue Rejik tells the story of the Vah Shir and their arrival on Luclin. He was a scout and a spy of middle rank on the day of the Great Explosion. His account is a rare record from the early days of Sharval, since written works have since been prohibited there, and his account is as follows. Here I record what transpired when the great city of Sharval was sent into the new land. My name is Rejik, and I am a Terran of Sharval. I have served both my guild and the city of Sharval faithfully since I was a cub, but now my faith wavers. Strange things have happened in the past few turns, things inexplicable and unfathomable. Somehow, our fair city has transported to the moon of Luclin, far from the safety of Norath. I shall tell of these strange events and how this misfortune has befallen my people. In those days, the magic-wielding race of humans known as the Erudites were engaged in a ferocious civil war, in which a group of necromancers known as the Heretics sought to overwhelm their gentle brethren. Our great city was caught between the two forces, and though we struggled to remain neutral, most felt it was only a matter of time before we were drawn into the conflict. I was assigned to personally guard and serve our guildmaster, defending him from foes and carrying his messages to others. We received frequent updates on the Erudite War, and it was during the most fierce fighting that tragedy struck. My littermate, Reginak, was making report to the guildmaster when our entire city was rocked by a great explosion, and a fearsome light blinded us all. Even as we fell, the ground beneath us seemed to fall away, and there was a terrible sensation of rapid descent. Dust billowed, and the sound of falling masonry mixed with terrified screams. Several guards ran outside to see what was going on, while Reginak and I stood with our guildmaster. The guards returned, telling of chaos in the city. There was destruction throughout Charval, buildings crumbling and collapsing, debris scattered across the streets. A great cloud of dust obscured the sky so that nothing could be seen. The normally disciplined people of our city were in panic, and the guards were hard-pressed to keep peace. My guildmaster sent me out to evaluate the situation while Reznak remained with him. As I ventured out alone into the dust-choked chaos, the city was in tumult, but slowly the survivors began to re-establish order. The Dar Kura stood beside the Jarin, helping the injured. The Khaladun were regrouping to face whatever dangers threatened our fair city. No one seemed to understand what happened, save that something cataclysmic had befallen Charval. None said what we all knew to be true, that the Erudite War had finally come to us, and that we would suffer for it. After reporting to my guildmaster, we decided to confer with King Vah Shir. Once more, I picked my way through the dusty, rubble-filled streets, this time with Reznak, both of us escorting our guildmaster. The palace was as chaotic as the rest of the city, yet thanks to the ancestors, His Majesty Vah Shir and the royal family were uninjured. In solemn council, the guildmasters of the city commanded that Reznak and I should leave the city to see what the erudites and heretics had done. What we found was beyond anything we could have imagined. The land surrounding Charval was devastated. The city lay at the bottom of a huge crater, surrounded by rubble. We picked our way through the debris, finally emerging from the dust cloud, only to find out, overhead, the stars were completely different. Charval was not where it had been before. Something had moved the entire city. We tried to determine where we were from the pattern of the stars, but it proved beyond our abilities. Then came the greatest shock of all, for in the night sky rose the moon, Drenal, followed by a mighty blue orb that we only slowly realized was Norath herself. It began to dawn on us. The city had been transported onto Luclin herself. We hurried back to our king to report our findings. Vah Shir himself went with the guildmasters and his court astronomers to see this wonder. Eventually, it was determined that we were indeed on the moon. There was no way that we could duplicate the magics that transported us here, and we mourned the loss of our homeland. Now as we seek to find our way, I have been commanded to venture beyond the great crater to see what perils and challenges await us in our new home. There is opportunity here, and I hope to explore and discover this place's depths and uncover its mysteries. Luclin is a jealous and somewhat petty deity, but she chose in this case not to punish the interlopers, for she knew that their coming was not by choice. Once more, she allowed Norathian aliens to remain on her moon. Soon after arriving upon Luclin, the Karens also discovered that their connection to the spirits of Norath had been cut off. Only the great beast spirit Seteb Malni remained in contact with the Vah Shir, leading many of the catfolk to turn to agnosticism or worship the mighty Shateb exclusively. The Vah Shir, now newly named for their ruler and clan, struggled to survive on the New World. Most of their great city had been devastated, and the survivors were plagued by predators such as the Shiknar. Scouts reported that there was game nearby, however, as well as edible fungus in the caves below the city. The fungus was distasteful to the carnivorous Karens, but they made do with what they could find while rebuilding the city. Scouts discovered several deposits of phosphorescent mineral that they dubbed acrylia. Strong and durable, acrylia was used to make weapons and armor, and marble-bearing veins of acrylia was found to glow softly in the darkness. Large quantities of acrylia-veined marble were used in the reconstruction of Charval, and to this day, the city shines with a faint glow, illuminating the gloom on Luclin's dark side. The greatest deposit of acrylia they discovered was in the Tenebrous Mountains, a journey of several perilous weeks from the growing city. Acrylia caravans were forced to travel through the dangerous reaches of Hollowshade Moor, where the indigenous owlbears, sonic wolves, and Shiknar were a constant hazard. Beyond lay the mushroom forests, less dangerous in those days, but still a challenge. Once the caravan routes were established, however, Acrilia began to flow regularly into the city. Elsewhere, Karen civilization spread into Shadeweaver's Thicket, the forest adjacent to this new city. There, the native Zakra silkworms were harvested, and sturdy cloth was crafted from their tough cocoons. After Vah Shir hunters became acclimated to the new environment, they began to bring back game more regularly, and slowly the city's food shortage was eased. All seemed well on the moon, for the Vah Shir were far from Luclin's only new inhabitants. Occasionally, Lodakai poachers, an alliance of outlaw exiles and refugees from the human cities, plagued the Karens, attacking hunters or robbing travelers, but the Karen periodically dispatched warriors to drive out the brigands, keeping the region relatively secure. But greater disaster was yet to come. Within a decade of their arrival, the Vah Shir had rebuilt their city into a thriving and beautiful metropolis, well supplied and defended by both its isolation and the brave, honor-bound warriors who served Vah Kareth and his families. One fateful day, however, an entire shift of Vah Shir miners disappeared mysteriously, followed by the squad of warriors sent to find them. As the Karens debated what to do, the mines suddenly erupted with diminutive humanoids, ferocious, merciless beasts possessed of a wicked cunning and an apparent hatred for all other life forms. The Vah Shir were driven from the mines, retreating back into the mushroom forest before the enemy's onslaught. The humanoids, dubbed Gremlings for their dark, hostile expression and character, completely overran the mines and retook the mushroom forest, save for a small Vah Shir outpost. The mushroom forest was renamed the Gremling Forest and became a place of danger and violent death for the Karens. The struggle against the Gremlings and their mysterious ruler began in earnest. Their master was an individual known only as Master Tashaki, rumored to be a powerful undead creature of some kind, possibly even an undead Vah Shir. The Gremlings continued to raid into Vah Shir territory while the catfolk resisted ferociously. In the midst of these terrible events, further tragedy struck Sharval. Darkura, King Vah Kareth's chief shaman, told him that he had discovered a strange race dwelling on Luclin, a race known as the Akheva. Immortal, the Akheva were resurrected when slain, but in the process they destroyed vital members of the spirit world. Darkura and a band of warriors ventured into the darkness in the south, seeking out these Akheva. When Darkura did not return, King Vah Kareth himself followed, though his advisors begged him not to. The king did not return from his quest, and to this day, no one knows what became of him. Similarly, the great beast lord and explorer Kadi Shah had also disappeared while exploring the region known as the Grey. Today, the Karens' struggle with the Gremlings continue. The Vah Shir outpost in the Gremling Forest comes under attack regularly, but the catfolk launch attacks of their own, raiding into Acrilia caverns and returning with enough of the precious stone to keep their city and their craftsfolk in good supply. King Raja Kareth, direct descendant of the great King Vah, actively plans a campaign to attack the caverns and take them back, possibly defeating Tashaki once and for all. For their part, the Gremlings have spread throughout the regions surrounding Sharval. They maintain several settlements in Hollowshade Moor, and now fight a continual war with the owlbears and sonic wolves of the region. The Sharval have emerged as the most vital and culturally active race on the moon. Since the written word had such a great role in the creation of erudite magic, and because the catfolk blame the erudites for their exile, written records are banned among the Vah Shir, and knowledge is passed from generation to generation purely through verbal means. Scribes, of a sort, still exist among them, but they are now special Karens who store valuable information in their memory using an array of mnemonic devices and sheer strength of will, and pass information to their successors. The great history of the Vah Shir is maintained by a group of elite Karen bards called hymnists. The Karens patrol surrounding lands such as Hollowshade Moor and Shadeweaver's Thicket, fighting a continual battle with poachers, bandits, Tegi, and Galorian tribesmen, insectoids, and fungus fiends. Vah Shir beast lords wander the moon of Luclin seeking knowledge regarding other races and factions of the world. So far, these agents have remained aloof in the various conflicts of Luclin, though it is known that King Raja is known to favor the Combine Loyalists in their conflict with the Inquisitors, and that he hates the cruelty of Shissar. As with other lunar races, the Vah Shir were changed irrevocably by the arrival of outsiders from Norath. Realizing that their old homeland was once more accessible from Norath, some catfolk began discussing returning. This debate continues to rage, and a number of Vah Shir have traveled to Norath and returned to report that the place is a virtual paradise compared to the dark, barren landscape of the moon. Some of these Vah Shir have even chosen to stay on Norath, dwelling among their Karen cousins and winning great fame. So far, however, there is no great movement from the city that the catfolk have labored so hard to rebuild. The fall of the Akheva. The first and greatest of the Goddess Luclin's creations were the giant four-armed immortals called the Akheva. Guardians of the moon, their powers were unchallenged by any other lunar race, and they ruled a vast section of the moon's dark side in the region today known as the Maiden's Eye. There they rebuilt a mighty citadel called Ka-Vethan. For ages, they remained the most powerful force on the moon of Luclin, served by numerous other races, most notably the Sentai clan of the Tegi, who crafted many of the Akhevan's greatest weapons. Yet eventually, the Akheva's greatest culture fell, as so many do, because of greed and violence. The Akhevan high priestess, Akhel-Hara, created a twin from her own blood and shadow. This twin, called Aten-Hara, was to aid in the administration of the Akhevan affairs. However, in the end all she brought was destruction. In those days, the Akheva spoke a language called the Fleshless Tongue. While outsiders might learn to understand a handful of words, this language in its entirety is utterly incomprehensible to ordinary mortals. Yet many Akheva at the time chose to communicate directly with mortals in their own languages. Aten-Hara, devoted to the service of Luclin and utterly convinced the Akhevan superiority, demanded that the practice be stopped, and that Akheva speak only the fleshless tongue. Akhel-Hara resisted, and the Akheva began to split into rival factions. Though to outsiders this might have seemed a trivial cause for conflict, to the Akheva it was a matter of deadly seriousness, and in time, the rivalry between the followers of the two priestesses exploded into open warfare. The factions fought viciously, the members of each claiming that they were the true servants of the goddess. The conflict raged for many years, and many Akheva perished. At long last, the priestess Aten-Hara prayed to Luclin and summoned a great storm to destroy her rivals. She got far more than what she bargained for. The resulting tempest blasted the region and scorned it of life. Akhel-Hara and many of her faction perished in the cataclysm. But in the end, the war had no real victor, for both sides were devastated. As the storm subsided, Aten-Hara led her people from the place now called the Maiden's Scar and founded the citadel of Vexthal. Those still loyal to Akhel-Hara's cause remained behind in the Maiden's Scar, inhabiting the ruins of the old temple. The rivalry between the two factions continues today, but neither has the numbers or will to march on the other. Just the same, the rival strongholds, the Akheva ruins and deadly citadel of Vexthal, remain two of the most dangerous places on the moon of Luclin. Rediscovery. After countless years of isolation, the permanent route between Norath and Luclin's moon was discovered by the great wizard Al-Kabor. The wizard spires of Norath were converted into transportation devices, and ordinary adventurers began to visit the distant moon in great numbers. Luclin's tolerance, already tested by repeated incursions, had reached its breaking point, but she saw no immediate way to get the interlopers to leave her moon without enraging the other gods and finally ending her years of isolation. Though enraged by the presence of new strangers, Luclin waits patiently, knowing that eventually the moon will move away from Norath, possibly closing the gates and preventing further travel between the worlds. If or when this happens, thousands are sure to be stranded on Luclin's moon, and the goddess is none too happy at the prospect. The steady flow of outsiders shows no sign of abatement, however, and the numerous factions of the moon, foremost among them the Inquisitors, the Loyalists, the Shissar, the Vah Shir, and the Akheva, have reacted differently. Some wish only to be left alone, while others see in the visitors the opportunity for greater power, wealth, or knowledge. For their part, the Norathian visitors have quite enthusiastically taken sides in the various conflicts of the moon, potentially unbalancing long-standing struggles and bringing the threat of chaos to Luclin's once tranquil abode. For her part, the goddess watches and waits, but one day she will act against the interlopers. This concludes part 1 of what will be a 4-part series of the lore of Luclin. You can look forward to part 2, which will cover all of the great cities of Luclin. This part 1 of the 4-part series will likely be by far the longest of the 4. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.